Story begins as a couple people observe a giant monster approaching a group of soldiers. The man wonders if the woman has heard of the legend of the R. He explains that way back in ancient times, the god supposedly created these monstrosities to devour the world. She would like to know what happened after, but he explains that she wouldn't be able to handle that information. They then watch the soldiers as they prepare an attack on the beast, eventually firing an arrow at its head. They begin to celebrate their successful attack, but are shocked to find that the beast is completely unharmed. The creature begins an attack of its own, and the man decides that someone has to help them. The woman attempts to point out that they haven't been paid to do anything yet, but it's too late as the man begins to descend and starts an incantation. The woman then begins to glow and disappears as the man finishes his descent. He is now a powered-up version of himself, and he uses a nice attack to stop the monster's projectiles, while simultaneously freezing the monster. The soldiers celebrate as they see that the monster is defeated, and realize that it was thanks to a paladin. Their celebration is once again cut short when the monster breaks free from its ice prison, but the man ends the fight with one last attack. The story then moves forward 30 years, and we find ourselves in a heavily guarded building. One of the guards is disappointed to see that they got stuck with the real pain in the neck when he looks into a cell. Before he can continue his work, the girl in the cell breaks free, and apologizes to those she harms in her attempt to escape. She also manages to find some delicious food. As the number of people chasing her continues to grow, the commander reports to the higher-ups that the girl they call the prototype has escaped, and they are instructed to get her back at all costs. The girl manages to make it outside, but is disappointing to see that it's a long way down for freedom. The guards arrive and explain that she cannot escape, so it would be best if she went back to her room calmly. She apologizes for not being able to do so and jumps off, much to everyone's shock. Elsewhere, a man gets drunk on his boat when the prototype emerges from the water, and the two just stare at each other. They eventually greet each other, but the girl is seemingly in a rush and takes off immediately. The man then simply goes back to relaxing, thinking not much of it, when a guard appears on a boat before him. They ask him about the girl, and the man explains he just saw a cute girl run off just a minute ago. The guards are frantic and decide to report to the captain, since they fear she might have gone into town. The man couldn't care less about what was happening, and is only upset to see that he has run out of booze. We then see that the prototype has made it into town as she bumps into someone. She is apologetic, but the woman doesn't want to hear it, as she is upset that her flowers have been ruined. The girl pulls out several coins in the hope that it will be enough to pay for the damage, but the woman kindly only takes one. The woman introduces herself as Kumi, and asks for the girl's name, but she has no answer. Kumi then takes her home just as the guards happen to come by. Elsewhere, a man named Mezumi asked for updates on the search for the prototype, but is told that the guards sent into town haven't found her yet. Mezumi becomes upset, and instructs him to devote all resources into finding the girl he calls prototype number 22, while using as much force as necessary. When the guards leave, he consumes a couple crystals, and a man in the shadows questions whether everything is okay, but Mezumi says not to worry. Back in town, we see that their prototype has been cleaned up, and given clothes that she is very grateful for. The next day, we find the man from the boat walking through town grumpily. He crosses paths with a small girl, carrying lots of boxes, and she calls out to the grumpy man to ask if he happens to be a giant beast hunter. He reveals that she is correct, and asks if she knows a place nearby where he can find work. She explains that there are a group of hunters leaving town soon for a mission, so he asks what the pay is. She states that it is the average market price, with 20% of the profits getting split among the group of hunters. He leaves and the girl points out how lifeless the man's eyes were. Afterwards, the girl sets up her shop and we see that the prototype is wandering around nearby. One of the items in the girl's shop catches her eye, and the girl explains that it's a gem from a giant beast. The prototype has no clue what she is talking about, so the girl tells her that the giant that roams these parts is called Gladian. It's so dangerous that it will tear down the walls and invade the city if left unchecked. The girl points out that once the giant is slain, they will be able to farm a bunch of gems and oil from their carcasses after the hunt. Many of the merchants there make their entire living by selling items that come from the giant's body, but the empire takes all the best stuff. The girl asks that she stopped wasting her time and buys something, so the prototype asks about a ring. The merchant explains that it is the ring of promise. Whoever wears that ring is destined to become the savior of ours, and rescue the world from certain doom. The prototype wonders if all someone has to do is wear the ring to save the world. But the merchant explains that only one person can actually fulfill that promise. She then warns that the ring is cursed, and anyone who wears it will have their life drained away. The prototype somehow manages to put the ring on, much to the shock of the merchant, and she offers to give her a good deal on it. At the gate, hunters give their names. One man has Gonk the Stonecutter, and another is called Alim the Lightning. It is then the boatman's turn, but he is hesitant to give his name, and it is explained that it is so the city will pay for his funeral if he dies. He concedes and reveals his name to Bahido, the already dead. A man makes fun of his alias, and asks that he not soiled himself on the battlefield. Another states that it shouldn't be too hard, since all they have to do is lure the beast out, and then herd it towards the wall. Elsewhere, it is explained to the ruler of the land that reports of giant beasts are on the rise this year, and it is highly recommended that they refrain from splitting up their forces. However, another person explains that their enemies, the barbarians, will be distracted and that this is the perfect time to strike them down. Afterwards, the woman who warned about the rise in giant beast is upset, since they didn't seem to care about her warning. Their people will suffer many casualties, but the emperor simply doesn't understand. Outside town, we see that the giant beast uses its strength to gather gems from a mountain. The hunters watch nearby and begin their mission. Inside town, the merchant explains that she doesn't have to run the shop for the rest of the day, after her profits from the ring she sold. Just then, the townspeople are alerted that the hunters have lured a giant beast, and it's already nearby. The next phase of the plan is to let it get close, and then carpet bomb the beast. The plan has been messed up though, and they won't be able to fire arrows since hunters are too close. One of them is in great danger. Kyojuu descends the wall to rescue him, even ignoring warnings not to. He moves very swiftly, managing to rescue the hunter, and allowing the guards to fire their explosive arrows. The job is done, and we see for a brief moment that the prototype's ring begins to glow. The giant is defeated, and Kyojuu explains that the hunter is injured but will survive. That night the search for the prototype continues, but inside a tavern the hunters celebrate. Kyojuu is praised for how heroic he had been, and someone states how even a paladin would have been scared silly. None of them have ever even seen a paladin though. When the tavern closes, Mizumi sits next to Kyojuu, and explains how his heroic act left a strong impression, and reminded him of a paladin. Kyojuu is completely disinterested, and Mizumi points out how the giant beasts are not humanity's true enemy. A war that will split ours into two factions is coming, and fighters like Kyojuu will be needed. Much to Mizumi's disappointment, Kyojuu declines and leaves. Elsewhere, the prototype states how much fun she had, and the merchant offers to let her stay at her place. However, some guards spot her and begin a chase, which the merchant finds very amusing. A guard fires an arrow that is just about to strike the prototype, but the scene then cuts to an approaching giant monster with no head. We then see that the girl is struck by multiple arrows. Black dust forms around her and shockingly destroys some guards when it touches them. The prototype begins to glow, and she attempts to warn everyone to run away. Just as we get a glimpse of how Jito's weapon seems to react, he then emerges from his boat, to find that the girl is emitting a bright light while screaming loudly. Kyojuu is absolutely stunned, and has a brief memory of a woman from his past named Toka. He snaps out of it and realizes that it is something called the bereavement curse at work. In town, everyone runs away as the abnormal giant beast decimates the wall, and the hunters simply decide to run away. The guards make the decision to ignore the beasts, since capturing their prototype is much more important, and fire arrows at her. However, Kyojuu arrives just in time to knock the arrows away, and takes a prototype into his arms, bringing her back to normal. The two fall into the water, where Kyojuu calls upon his weapon, and gives the girl a kiss on the head. They appear in another space, where he introduces himself as Kyojuu the already dead, and she states that she is known as 22, but wants to be called Kumi the 22nd. He wants to know what a cleric like her is doing without her paladin escort, but then points out how stopping the giant beast should come before anything. The merchant watches from above the water, and we see that Kyojuu summoned weapon finally arrives. The merchant continues to watch intently, and states out loud that the promise will be fulfilled. Thanks for watching part 1. Next part coming soon.